President Donald Trump said Tuesday he is likely to impose a 25% tariff on foreign auto imports as part of his effort to reshape U.S. trade policy. Speaking at his Mar-a-Lago residence while signing executive orders, Trump stated he would make an official announcement on April 2, but the tariff would be around 25%. He cited the cancellation of car plants in countries like Mexico as a reason for the move. On Friday, Trump had already signaled that new auto tariffs were coming, aligning with reports his administration is set to deliver on April 1, which could provide the legal foundation for further import restrictions. Expanding his trade policy measures, Trump also revealed plans for 25% or higher tariffs on semiconductors and pharmaceuticals. The president emphasized his goal of encouraging companies to establish operations in the U.S., stating that businesses setting up plants domestically would avoid tariffs altogether. When they come here and build their factories, there's no tariff. We want to give them that chance, he said. His remarks come just before a meeting between EU Trade Chief Maros Sefcovic and key Trump economic advisors, including Commerce Secretary nominee Howard Lutnick, Trade Representative nominee Jamieson Greer, and National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett. The EU is working to ease trade tensions with Washington. However, Trump falsely claimed that the EU had lowered its 10% vehicle import tax to match the U.S. quote, S 2.5% tariff on some vehicles. Oil prices moved higher on Wednesday, as supply disruptions in Russia and the United States affected global markets, while traders awaited updates on Ukraine peace talks. Brent crude futures rose 0.3% to $76.04 per barrel, extending gains for a third consecutive session. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude for March delivery increased by 0.3% to $72.08 per barrel, reflecting a 1.7% gain since Friday. The more actively traded April contract also advanced by 0.3% to $72.04 per barrel. Russia reported a reduction in oil flows through the Caspian Pipeline Consortium due to a Ukrainian drone strike on a pumping station. The disruption has cut pipeline capacity by 30 to 40%, potentially removing up to 380,000 barrels per day from global supply. Meanwhile, extreme cold in North Dakota has impacted U.S. production, with state authorities estimating a reduction of up to 150,000 barrels per day. The U.S. government confirmed plans for further discussions with Russia regarding the Ukraine conflict, raising the possibility of easing sanctions that have limited Russian oil exports. In the Middle East, Israel and Hamas are set to enter indirect negotiations on the next phase of a ceasefire deal in Gaza. While supply constraints pushed oil prices higher, economic concerns loomed as former U.S. President Donald Trump announced potential tariffs of around 25% on automobiles, semiconductors, and pharmaceutical imports. Analysts warn that such measures could raise consumer costs, slow economic growth, and dampen fuel demand. With ongoing supply challenges and geopolitical uncertainties, oil markets remain volatile as investors assess future risks and opportunities. Asian markets edged lower on Wednesday, as investors reacted to former U.S. President Donald Trump's renewed tariff threats, despite record highs in the S&P 500 and European shares. Since taking office, Trump has implemented a 10% tariff on all Chinese imports and announced a 25% levy on goods from Mexico and non-energy imports from Canada, though the latter has been delayed by a month. On Tuesday, he signaled plans for further tariffs on pharmaceuticals and semiconductor chips, stating they would start at 25% and increase over the next year. Additionally, auto tariffs are expected to take effect by April 2. While investors largely viewed Trump's tariff moves as negotiation tactics, market sentiment remained cautious. The U.S. dollar strengthened as geopolitical concerns, including tensions between Russia and Ukraine, drove safe haven demand. MSCI's broadest index of Asia-Pacific shares outside Japan declined 0.29% after reaching a three-month peak earlier in the session. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index also dipped 0.3% as traders took profits following a strong rally. Despite the pullback, the Hang Seng remains up over 13% in 2025, competing with Germany's DAX for the title of the world's best-performing market. Meanwhile, Chinese tech stocks continued their upward trend, fueled by optimism surrounding AI startup DeepSeek and a recent meeting between President Xi Jinping and industry leaders. With ongoing geopolitical and economic uncertainties, markets remain volatile as investors assess the impact of trade policies on global growth. The United States' stance on Russia's war in Ukraine shifted significantly with the first meeting between U.S. and Russian negotiators under President Donald Trump's administration. This marked a stark departure from the previous firm approach taken by former President Joe Biden, who had rallied European allies to isolate Moscow both economically and diplomatically. Talks in Riyadh on Tuesday signaled a potential thaw in U.S. Russia relations, as officials agreed to establish negotiating teams for future discussions and work toward restoring the normal functioning of each other's diplomatic missions. This marked the first direct talks between the two nations on the war in Ukraine, the most devastating conflict in Europe since World War II. The meeting came just weeks after Trump's return to the White House, with Ukraine and NATO partners noticeably absent from the discussions. Critics have raised concerns that Trump's relatively inexperienced team granted Russia significant diplomatic gains before negotiations even began. Trump's push to broker a resolution has fueled fears that his approach could weaken Kiev's position and compromise European security. His recent statements ruling out NATO membership for Ukraine and dismissing the idea of reclaiming occupied territories have drawn backlash, with European leaders accusing him of making unilateral concessions to Moscow. The lack of European representation in the negotiations has further unsettled U.S. allies, prompting discussions on whether European governments should contribute peacekeepers to uphold any potential agreement on Ukraine. Trump indicated he would not oppose such a move, but Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov swiftly rejected the idea of NATO troops in Ukraine, signaling resistance to Western involvement. Despite the diplomatic engagement, Russia did not appear to offer any concrete concessions during the talks, leaving uncertainty over how future negotiations might unfold. A growing number of American consumers are increasing their purchases due to concerns over potential price hikes linked to President Donald Trump's tariffs, according to a report released by creditcards.com on Tuesday. The study found that 1 in 5 Americans have begun stockpiling goods in response to the expected economic impact. Tariffs generally contribute to inflation by raising the cost of imported goods, forcing businesses to either absorb the higher expenses or pass them on to consumers through increased prices. As production costs rise across industries that rely on foreign materials and components, broader inflationary pressures can follow. Consumer fear of future price increases has driven a surge in purchasing behavior, particularly for essential and non-perishable items such as food, toiletries, and medical supplies. Many shoppers aim to buy these goods before further price hikes take effect. The report highlighted that 22% of respondents felt that Trump's tariff policies had a significant impact on their decision to make large purchases, while 30% reported that the tariffs had at least some influence on their spending habits. Wall Street analysts have expressed concern that tariffs could further accelerate inflation, potentially preventing the Federal Reserve from lowering interest rates. Economic growth may also slow as uncertainty surrounding trade policies weighs on consumer confidence and corporate decision-making. Additionally, the study noted that 1 in 5 Americans described their recent shopping behavior as doom spending, a term for impulsive or excessive purchases driven by economic anxiety and uncertainty. About 23% of respondents said they anticipated going into or worsening their credit card debt in the coming year as a result. At a World Trade Organization meeting on Tuesday, China strongly criticized U.S. President Donald Trump's sweeping tariff measures, warning that these tariff shocks could destabilize global trade and increase the risk of a global recession. Beijing has already imposed retaliatory tariffs and filed a WTO dispute against Washington in response to Trump's decision to implement a 10% tariff on all Chinese imports. The ongoing WTO General Council meeting marks the first time these escalating trade tensions have been formally discussed at the organization's highest decision-making body. However, with the U.S. yet to appoint a trade ambassador in Geneva, its response remains unclear. WTO Director General Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala has urged the organization's 166 members to avoid retaliatory measures, warning that trade wars could have devastating economic consequences. While no immediate resolution was expected from the meeting, trade officials suggested that the discussions could indicate whether further escalation is likely. Some delegates viewed China's call for debate not just as a challenge to the United States, but as a strategic move to present itself as a rules-abiding WTO member, an approach that could strengthen its position in global trade negotiations. Trade disputes between China and the United States have existed for years, with Beijing accusing Washington of violating WTO rules, while the U.S. argues that China's developing country status grants it unfair advantages. Although Trump's administration has pulled back from several international organizations, the WTO has so far not been a primary target. However, newly appointed U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer has criticized the institution as deeply flawed, signaling that tensions may continue. President Donald Trump has signed an executive order asserting White House control over independent federal agencies, significantly expanding presidential authority. The move is expected to face strong legal challenges, as it tests the controversial unitary executive theory, which argues that the president holds sole control over the executive branch. Traditionally, independent agencies such as the Federal Communications Commission, Federal Trade Commission, and Securities and Exchange Commission have operated with autonomy, insulated from political influence. The executive order grants Russ Vought, Director of the Office of Management and Budget, oversight powers to set performance standards, monitor agency heads, and report directly to Trump on their efficiency. Vought is also authorized to review and adjust agency budgets to align with the administration's policies and priorities. The order formalizes steps the Trump administration has already taken to assert control over these agencies, setting the stage for a legal battle over the federal government's structure. Trump has previously dismissed officials leading independent agencies, including Gwen Wilcox, former chair of the National Labor Relations Board, and Jennifer Abruzzo, the NLRB's general counsel. Wilcox has challenged her removal in court. Vought also assumed the role of acting director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, cutting its funding and dismissing staff. In his first term, Trump pressured the FTC and FCC to penalize social media platforms accused of bias against conservatives. The executive order's broad scope marks a significant shift in governance, directly challenging historical precedents that safeguarded agency independence. By consolidating control, Trump's directive redefines executive authority and is poised to trigger a fierce constitutional debate in the court.